Now let's talk about a few of the ethical guidelines that come into play when we're using humans in our research studies. So there's not just moral things to worry about here, there's also some federal laws. And it wasn't always that way, but they were developed after some pretty egregious or horrific practices were done in some studies. So you may have, for example, and there's more than these, there's stuff the Nazi doctors did to patients and such, but here in the United States, probably one of the best known historic cases was done by the U.S. government itself. It was called the Tuskegee Syphilis study. And in this one, over 600 men who were very poor African-American men in Alabama, they were sharecroppers. They had syphilis, the vast majority of them, there was a control group. And the point of the study was to see what happened over years when the disease went untreated. So the men were intentionally deceived, that were not allowed to know the actual diagnosis of what they had. And even later when penicillin was shown to be able to cure the disease, the researchers intentionally made sure that those men did not get a chance to have it because they wanted to see what would happen. The study went for 40 years until a journalist uncovered it and it became a cover story in the New York Times, and then the project came to an abrupt stop. There's a great documentary on it.
For those men, the study needs to go to the end point.
And we already have 10 years of data.
10 years is not the end point.
What is then?
We have to validate our facts through autopsy, Nurse Evers. That is the end point. That will make it science, not guesswork.
We're gonna wait for them to die?
Science is sometimes a hard taskmaster, Nurse Evers. You think I like not treating them? No. But we have to finish the study. We have a chance to make history here.
History?
Also, you may have heard of the Stanford prison study by Philip Zimbardo. This one was a ethical dilemma because, for a lot of reasons, but one is that once the students volunteered for the project and they were in the prison, they were no longer let to leave. There was nothing voluntary about this prison. And as the conditions deteriorated and different forms of emotional and even physical violence began to grow, the directors of the experiment found themselves being sort of sucked into it. And so, again, great film was made out of this. I encourage you to check it out.
Look at this guy. Thinks he's John Wayne or something.
You address me as Mr. Correctional Officer.
This might be an interesting 2 weeks after all.
Why don't you make up your bunk, 8612?
I did, Mr. Correctional Officer.
Well, that's not what I see.
Hey, what are you doing here? Just me!
What was that?
You just hit him. You're not supposed to hit him.
Should we step in? No. Let the guards figure it out. Let's see where it goes.
Good evening, gentlemen. How about we make this one a night to remember?
This is all real. They won't let you go. They won't let us leave.
Those are not prisoners. Those are not subjects. Those are boys, and you are harming them.
Please! Let me out of here! I want out! I want out now!
You thought you were gonna get some playtime in the yard, boy? Is that what you thought this was gonna be?
I had no idea it would turn out this way.
So there is plenty more, but those are a couple of examples why we need guidelines, right? If you're making a new drug and it's got side effects and you have to stab 1,000 babies with a needle and they're going to have pain and side effects, and you can stab 1,000 and be 80% confident that this drug works, or you can stab 10,000 to become 90% confident. Is it worth stabbing 9,000 more babies to get 10% more confident? Hard to say, right? Depends on a lot of factors. So there are groups that have to make these decisions. Those are called IRBs, or institutional review boards. Every single institution, whether it's a university, a hospital, or a government agency, or a nonprofit, anybody that does research and takes federal money needs to have an IRB. And it's a committee of scholars who have expertise in the areas of the research being done that get together and they look at the proposed research coming across their desk, and they ask a lot of questions about the treatment of the people involved. Now, the formal report that sort of created these guidelines here in the U.S. It's called the Belmont Report. It was issued in 1978. It's been around for a while. You can find it online. It's at the Department of Health and Human Services. And this requires that there be IRBs at each institution and that there's some basic principles followed. And here's just a few of them. One, you need to have informed consent. The people who are in your study, they need to give permission that they were in it. Now, there may be some loopholes because some studies the people can't know or it'll change the project. But for those cases, then the next principle is really comes into play. And that's that you have to weigh the assessment of risk and reward, right? So if you're causing a lot of pain for us to learn a little bit of knowledge, it's probably not worth doing. If you're causing a little bit of pain and you're gaining a lot of knowledge that's good for society, then it might be worth causing a little bit of distress, right? So say you're interviewing victims of some kind of trauma, maybe a sexual trauma or war or violence of some kind. And just the interview itself will kind of stir up a lot of negative feelings and emotions about that. There are researchers who will do that. And it might make sense if this is a credentialed researcher who is going to write a study that might help psychological professionals when counseling or doing intervention or doing recovery work, then maybe stirring up some of those negative emotions are worth the outcome because it'll be better for people. So informed consent, assessment of risk and reward, and there has to be a kind of justice in the selection of subjects. Like in the Tuskegee one, these were all poor African-American men in a rural community. This one demographic bore the whole brunt of the negative impacts of that study. If you're going to do a study, you generally have to think about in your selection process that more than one demographic is facing maybe the difficulties of it. In the end, we want to treat people with respect. It creates a little more red tape for the researcher, but when we look at some of the things that have happened in the past, it's just a better way to do research.